You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos Stilianessis.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Here for the Truth. This is episode 29. As always, the first half of this episode will be available to the public and the second half to our members on Patreon. We're so glad you all could join us for this very special episode with the incredible guest who we're truly honored to have join us here today. Ali Zeck. Some of you may know her. A quick little bio on Ali. Ali is a health and medical freedom advocate sharing her story and experience with the world in order to educate and liberate people from the dangers of big pharma drugs and help them to tune into their own power. After being placed on psychiatric drugs for over 20 years, being told that she was mentally ill with multiple psychiatric hospital stays and suicide attempts, she found ultimate peace by coming off all the drugs, healing her trauma, and adopting a holistic lifestyle. Ali, we're so glad that you can join us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for just being a voice of truth and like your spirit and your energy and your words. I mean, I've been following you on Instagram for a long time, and every time your post comes up, I'm just grateful, grateful for what you share and that you share your journey.
Yeah. I mean, this podcast is called Here for the Truth. And I think anyone that's followed you and is familiar with what you share knows that you are 100% someone who's here for the truth. You're all in. You got both feet here. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, just really, first off, thank you for the way that for your transformation, for your journey, and for all the things that have culminated to you being here to being able to speak your truth to power in such a potent way to affect so many people. It's a joy to watch.
Thank you, guys.
Real quick, did you have a biogeometry thing as well, or is that something else?
I do. Yeah.
There you go. Cool.
I don't have though is the little.
Oh, the little whatever this is for harmonizing electromagnetic fields. Cool.
Mine may not be as effective, but
no, it's all good. When the camera went down a little bit, I was like, wait, I noticed that. Cool.
I think I swiped one of the last ones in the US a while ago. So
nice. All right, bro, where do you want to start with this one?
So Ali, I'm just I guess like with everything that you share, if because we love getting into people's personal hero's journey, if you want to talk about some of your major rites of passage along your journey that have guided you into who you are today.
Yeah, well, let me preface that with something as well, because one thing I notice in the way you share is that like you see it the same way I do, that the government that claims to be caring for us is obviously extremely narcissistic, right? Whatever's behind it. And so obviously in your journey, you've experienced extreme narcissism. And through your story, is that something that's helped you awaken to see actually the mechanisms of control and how they work in the basis of narcissism?
Yes. So my concept of narcissism has evolved over the last few years. I was in a abusive marriage and was with my ex-husband for 30 years. And I believe that what we're talking about when we're talking about the government's doing this is actually not narcissism. I would call it psychopathy, because my ex-husband at his core is an amazing human being. I define narcissism in the general public as very unresolved trauma, where they adopt really unconscious coping mechanisms. And those coping mechanisms usually mean controlling other people out of fear and out of being rejected. So narcissists, I think narcissists are really getting a bad label. And I used to be one of those people that would really label them. That's very, very different. Apologize. That's very different from psychopathy. And that's what I see and I feel and I know is going on with our governments and the world leaders and celebrities and people like that. They are in a conscious state, choosing to inflict harm and damage onto people of the world. And so right when this all started happening, I had gone through a lot of my trauma healing from that type of abuse. And really, I was gaslit, yes, in the relationship, but I was very gaslit being on pharma drugs. And all the doctors, the therapists, numerous of them, practitioners would always tell me that it wasn't the drugs that were causing me to be suicidal. It was my genetic mental illness. And that's a massive amount of gaslighting, because I never had genetic mental illness. I don't personally believe that mental illness exists. I believe, just like other things out in the world today, I believe that there are symptoms of an illness going around. And I believe that there are symptoms of mental illness, but it doesn't define itself as a label of mental illness. So in January of 2020, I started seeing what was happening in the world, and had learned to kind of tap into my intuition and listen to my body. And I started feeling the exact same feelings that I had felt in the relationship and from the practitioners. And I started to kind of match it up. And that's what I started my platform on. It shifted from, healing, psych drugs, into narcissistic abuse as it relates to governments and world control and really oppressing humanity. And it's very, very similar. Yes, it's really just absolute insanity. Once you awaken, Joel, and you start seeing the way the world really, really works, and the power of the mind, and also the power of very powerful systems to control people's minds. Once you awaken to that, it's really, you can't go back to sleep. It's like the world shifts from this colored view to a different color. And as much as you want to go back to that old color, you can't.
Yeah.
I started very quickly noticing the parallels and pointing it out to people on my platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a stark reality, that awakening, to actually realize that, whatever this is, whatever we're experiencing, we are here with some form of control, which 100% is trying to, I guess, that doesn't care about us, and it seems like more than ever wants the worst for us, right? So yeah, there's no doubt the color of the lens changes once you have that experience, for sure.
Yeah, and I find too, like you said, once you do take that red pill, the blue pill just doesn't have an impact. You can't go back and take the
as much as we would like to. I know we've all been, I literally have been like, do I have any old Xanax sitting around? Because right now for just a little bit, it would be, but we just can't. We're not made for that. And once you pass through that threshold, that opening, you can't crawl back into the womb. It's over then.
You were saying like you were starting to use your intuition around January 2020, around what was going on like with this whole affair. But what was the timeline with when you were talking about being like gaslit by your psychiatric professionals, et cetera? Like, I'm curious the timeline and what was it that allowed you and helped you to, I guess, heal and begin the next chapter?
Well, and again, that's also the way that I view my old therapists and practitioners has also shifted too, as I've evolved and healed more. I used to really put a lot of blame on them. I used to think that they were evil people, just like I would think that my ex was a really evil person. They're not evil. They're not evil people. They're just as much victims of the brainwashing, of the medical dogma and the Rockefeller, medicine, as I was, except for, caused me more harm. But they're just at a point where in their evolution where they're very, very trapped inside of this paradigm that Big Pharma is really, really altruistic and here to help us. And parts of Big Pharma, I will say, are good. I believe in acute medicine. I believe that there possibly may be, I'm not going to say it's all or nothing. There may be some drugs out there that may be beneficial to people. But as far as the psychiatric industry goes, in my experience, it was a full 20 years of, on and off, but for the most part on them the entire time, where I was just in a state of really just trauma, psychosis. It would vary, acute anxiety, panic attacks, akathisia, where I shook all the time. It was just a constant. And towards the end, when I really started going on more drugs, they were adding more drugs, because I will work with clients that started out with one drug for anxiety. And I kid you not, I've spoken with several that are on 12 or more drugs just to treat the anxiety. And so that was what I was coming down to. I think I was on 5 or 6 when I finally came off of all of them. And it was an evolution and a kind of just a complete breakdown of my reality as I knew it and understood it when I finally got to the point where I, came off the drugs. But it was a very, very long time that I was on them.
What was the catalyst for you to be like, this is enough?
My last suicide attempt, and I like to describe it only because if you look at me now, it's really hard to perceive or conceive that could have been me. It's even hard for me. So my last suicide attempt was in a psychiatric hospital. And to me, attempting suicide, they always say it's very stigmatized. I think suicide is, it's crying for attention, you're seeking attention. But I was in the hospital and I took 2 days to take sheets that were in the room with me on the bed, and I would rip them. They were really cheap sheets, and I would cough and rip them so the nurses around the corner, wouldn't hear what I was doing. It took me about 2 days, and then I would wad them up and stick them under my bed and go eat and go to group, come back in. So I, with forethought, planned to do this. And I remember when I took all of those sheet strips and tied them into a long rope. And I remember when I was walking to the window ledge to hang myself, I looked in the shower area, and I saw one of my dogs in there with like a hat on. So that's the state that I was in. I was literally in full psychosis, full-blown hallucination. And, there was like a bolt that hung these curtain balances, real thick bolt. And I put the rope over that and, walked off the ledge, tied it around my neck and walked off the ledge, and the bolt, the rope held, but the bolt did not hold. It pulled out of the wall. So that was kind of the catalyst, not for me, but for my story. I was still completely checked out. But my family at the time, after that, started looking for long-term care facilities for me to stay in, because I was a danger to myself completely. I was never a danger to anybody else, but I was definitely a danger to myself, and I was done. There was, it's a very funneling experience when your mind is like that, where my doctor my doctor that we'll talk about told me it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And I said it's the only thing that made sense, because it's not just the emotional aspect of those drugs. It's actually a physical aspect that you're going through too. Like I said, I had severe akathisia, lights really hurt my eyes, depth perception issues. I was terrified, horrific agoraphobia, hallucinating, all because of these drugs. And so the catalyst was I was seeing a brand new therapist when I got out of the hospital. And this really shows the divinity involved in all of our lives. If we are so lucky and we choose to move into that, is that I was seeing this new therapist, and she just happened to mention that there was a brand new book out by this holistic psychiatrist named Kelly Brogan. And she had just read it, and it had just come out in the last 2 weeks. And she really thought that I should travel from Kansas City to New York City to see Kelly Brogan. And for some reason, I don't know why, I did it. And I called Kelly Brogan's office. I got in within like a month, and was able to see her. So that was the real turning point for me. And I can honestly say Kelly doesn't like me putting this much, I guess, pressure, not, emphasis on her, but had I not met her, I would be dead. I would not be around, because she was really the one that ushered in my awakening and helped me come off the drugs.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, on those heroic journeys that we take, I mean, we find those guides. Obviously we still have to answer the call. We still have to show up. And I mean, you went from Kansas City to New York City, like that. You did that, and yet these people, they play a big role, these mentors, these guides, these teachers. So yeah, Kelly's amazing. I had the pleasure of meeting her this past, I think it was December. She's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
So
Beautiful human being.
Yeah.
Like looking back now, what was it that I guess Kelly was able to point you to within yourself for you to make that connection and begin your new life, I guess?
So I want to point out that when I make my posts, I'm paralleling, right? This, because it's all in the mind. It's
Absolutely.
definitely soul. It's a soul thing going on here. It's really like a soul rape, honestly, but it starts in the mind. And so when I'm writing the posts, I'm actually writing to an older version of myself, because when I'm talking to people, when I'm out talking to people that are still believing this narrative, I'm talking to an older version of myself that at the time believed for 25 years that I was, ill and needed a drug to fix me. So what Kelly did for me more than anything was she flipped my reality. I walked into her office, spent like 3 hours with her, which I noticed was longer than I had ever spent with any, doctor or therapist ever. And she really, got into the nuts and bolts of my life. And she just said to me, you're not mentally ill. And, wow, what an incredible human being to place that much hope, into someone that 3 weeks earlier, a month earlier, had just tried to hang herself in a hospital. I had the stigma of mental illness, the stigma of suicide. I had the diagnoses of all these, mental illnesses. And yet this doctor, this professional, this world-renowned psychiatrist is saying to me, no, you're not mentally ill. So it was it was a huge red pill. It was a huge shift. And I don't even know that at the time I even really got it. I just was so messed up from being on the drugs anyway. But I do know that she planted a seed for me that helped me, start to, kind of move out into this new paradigm and this new way of being. Into that birth canal, really, of awakening.
Yeah.
And what was that like once you started entering that birth canal? What was that like? Because you have to go through the process, I'm assuming, of weaning off some of these drugs, and then there's obviously the whole experience that goes with that. So what was that like?
So I made the mistake of coming twice off the drugs abruptly. When I got to Kelly, I had already stopped taking the drugs. And I always caution people that you don't ever want to come abruptly off of any psychiatric drug. And I did not know better. But I just want to make that one stipulation to people that are watching this that may be taking these drugs. It's really, really dangerous. And it can actually make your withdrawal symptoms much, much worse. So I had, I would say that it caused a very protracted withdrawal for me. I'm coming off of them that quickly. When I was in her office, my son Alec had graduated from West Point, which is up in New York, that weekend. So we were at his graduation the Friday before the Monday I saw Kelly. And I think I spent the majority of his graduation in the car, screaming, kicking, I was just literally psychotic and in a really, really bad state. So to walk into her office, I was in bad shape. And yet she still was able to say to me, you're not mentally ill. So it was a period of months. I wish it were that easy, right? I wish that it was like, oh, you're not mentally ill, you're off the drugs, everything's better. It was a huge breaking down of not only physically, getting off the drugs and having to change my lifestyle physically and how I ate, and learning how to do self-care, but it was also a breakdown of my reality. That is what moved me into, discovering that I had a lot of trauma, and a lot of the trauma was caused by the relationship, the marriage that I was in. It was a really, really toxic relationship, and I was toxic in it as well. Mm-hmm. So it was just like I said, a complete bottoming out, a complete just recalibration of everything that I knew about myself, about my childhood, about my marriage, about who I had been as a mother, about the drugs, about pharma. It was just a complete flipping of my reality. And it took, many, many months. I'd say it took probably 2 years. And I don't ever want to discourage people, but it was a solid 2 years of very, very intense pain. And again, not just only emotionally, but physically, to come off of those drugs and to start to really, write my reality and figure out what the truth really was.
So just for timeline purposes, what year was the Kelly meeting?
May of 2016, so 5 years ago.
Okay, and when did the relationship end?
It ended in a year later in about June of 2017. So I was, we were still together, but it was, I think I knew subconsciously on a very subconscious level that it was toxic, and it ended very, very painfully for both of us. Very toxic to our children. Definitely would not be the model for how to break up a family and a marriage at all. I can laugh about it now, but it was extremely painful to our entire family. It was really, really hard. Plus, I was still going through the withdrawal process, and it was just a combination of so much stuff.
Yeah, no, I've got no doubt. Yeah, but it's just, so like, it's kind of relative that like you kind of coming off the drugs also led to it manifesting physical in you ending the toxic relationships as well. It's like an inner detox and an external detox, I guess you could say that takes place.
Interesting too, Joel. I don't know. I don't want to quote her exactly, but I do know that I have heard Kelly say a few times that people that follow her protocol and really start to do this work, because it's not just about the drugs, right? It's much, much more than that. The drugs are just a symptom of something. But people that really, really follow her work, there's a very, very high separation and divorce rate typically it's women, for the women that follow her program, because there is a revealing, an unveiling of a different way to live that people start to step into. So yes, even though my husband was actually the one that left, and looking back, I do have a lot of compassion for him, because me on those drugs was it was very, very, it was absolute insanity. But at the same time, I had trauma from the relationship. There was a lot of infidelity. There was emotional and physical abuse as well. So it was, again, just a really toxic situation that also, as I came to find out, very much mirrored my childhood. So it was, again, breaking down these realities that I thought my childhood was pretty idyllic, and pretty good. And I did more work. I started to notice the parallels of why was I even attracted into this relationship? Well, there were childhood wounds that had manifested themselves in this relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that we all become versed with, and that's ultimately every decision that we make and everything we're drawing in, it's our shadow that's calling that in, right? It's the unconscious calling it in, so be able to expose itself so it can come to the surface and be healed. And how we go about that is, I guess, is up to each individual. So would you say that, generally speaking, the drugs, the psychiatric drugs, would be a means to avoid facing the childhood wounding or the childhood trauma on some level?
No, I couldn't go that far, but I would say that they were definitely a way for me to avoid not being in that relationship. I was, I call it I love my ex-husband. I think he's a very, very kind person deep down inside. I will always have a compassionate, a compassion for him, very much so. But I think it was a really toxic addiction is what it was. And it only manifested itself though because of those childhood wounds. So really it was, I didn't ever make it that far, Joel, but I would say it was more just for me to avoid, having boundaries and being treated right. And, being able to speak my voice inside of a relationship and being treated with respect. It was a way for me to avoid all of that.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, having no boundaries is usually, the reason why these things evolve. And I mean, I know, I don't know actually where I was going with that. It's kind of escaped me, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Ellie, I wanted to ask you too, because obviously, your son is a leader in the medical freedom, health freedom movement. And I'm curious, like, what was it like for your family during this whole process and the communication and what they were dealing with? And I don't want you to speak for them, but like, how did that impact you? Because it's like that saying goes, our greatest wounds become our greatest gifts. And so based on what you've been through, and obviously like your children have been through, witnessing you through this process, they have garnered strength from it, and they are speaking out and being leaders in their communities as well. So I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit.
I used to do it with a really heavy heart, say this, but my children did not have a mom while they were growing up. I was really good. My older kids, Alec and Emma, I was really good until they were about 6. And that's when the infidelity and the abuse really, really started in the marriage. And then I turned immediately to drugs again, and really started going on them heavy. And then also denying, or not denying, I was in front of therapists that had worked within the family. They knew there was infidelity. They knew that there was physical and emotional abuse, but yet no one ever said to me, you have trauma. These symptoms that you're showing up with here are trauma symptoms. And so it was somehow converted into, you have mental illness. And, for God love me, I was showing up asking for help. And I just got to the wrong people that didn't have an understanding or a concept of what trauma does to the human mind and the human condition. So my kids were really, what a turbulent life for them, to see there was the infidelity they knew. Their dad, went to rehab. I fell apart. I very much parentified Alec. I would cry on his shoulder. And, on top of that, the drugs and just a constant up and down for me, in and out of hospitals. Emma would pack my bags for me to go to the psych hospital. At a very, very young age, they would come visit me there. So I can only imagine, but all the time, we were a very wealthy, well-known family, trying to exude this level of just normalcy, which there was not. Both sides, both parents. And it was a life of chaos for them. And at the very end, I'd say, from 2016 to now, actually to about a year ago, was complete hell on earth. It was an unraveling for all of us. And we would somehow all of my kids would end up at my house, even though they're older. They were living with me at the time, and we would all be here together. And there were, times where we would not be speaking to each other, involved in the work though, involved and engaged in our healing. In January of 2000 and I want to say 18. So my ex-husband, we separated in June of 17. In January of 18, I found a trauma therapist. And I remember being on the phone with him, and he was like, has anyone ever told you that you have trauma? And I was just like, no. And I remember working with him, and I would, I ran down and told my kids, I was like, you guys, I think we have trauma. And I know that might sound really elementary to us now, but at the time we had no conception of that. I had no idea what trauma did, or that I even had trauma. And that was the first therapist, and God bless him for pointing out, you have trauma. You have gone through a lot. You've gone through the meat grinder, and what you're showing now, these symptoms are really just symptoms of trauma, combined with the gaslighting by, the mental health community that I have mental illness, and then compounding it with shame and guilt. And why would you try to kill yourself? That's so selfish. What a selfish person. Mothers don't do that. And so, that created more trauma on top of the underlying trauma that I already had. So it was a very, very difficult work for my kids and I, and we all did it though. And I'm so, empowered by our story. I really am, because these, a toxic marriage just on its own, right? Or toxic childhoods just on its own can split families up. Or I've seen people that have been on psych drugs and have lost everything. Their families have walked away from them, and they've never been able to, level out and really, become better after those drugs. So I feel so fortunate that we were able to work through and maneuver through all of it. The drugs, the family breaking up, the marriage breaking up, my kids not having a childhood, and all of the trauma that created in them. We've been able to, somehow take all that in, process it, transmute it. And then what we have found is that serving others and speaking out to help empower others who may be, in similar situations is what, we're here for.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, based on what you said, is that in essence, you were working on your trauma and the wounding together as a family in a sense. And I think that's something that people don't realize how important that is, because people experience life and then they feel like they're alone to deal with it. And so I think you can heal much quicker and build more resilience when it's done in some sort of communal setting, because I remember reading about like different places in Africa. They've been through such horrific things, but because they're able to talk about things, because they're able to process things in a certain way, that it doesn't have the same impact on them as opposed to someone who experiences something, doesn't tell anyone anything, can't share it in story, and is locked away in their apartment, etc. So it just seems it's pretty beautiful that you're able to have each other. And I'm sure it wasn't always rainbows and butterflies, and that it was the challenge. But that's what I get from hearing you say that, is like there's a power in healing when you're able to go through something and talk about things as a family.
I totally agree. And it was hell. I mean, it was absolute. There were, like I said, there was a time my kids didn't speak to me. They believed the narrative coming from my ex that I was psycho and trying to manipulate him. And so it was extremely painful. And then, to get my kids and myself to understand the family generational patterns that had come down from both parents, right? From me and then from their father as well. And how this was a real breaking point in our evolution and our lineage, that we had to see these patterns. And I, those are things I'd been trying to point out, I will say, intuitively my entire marriage. Like, hey, we can't treat each other like that. We have to be direct and honest. I don't like passive aggressive behavior. And it's just a very, wonderful family. They really are, but they're just very set. And this is their coping mechanism. This is how they cope with their own trauma, by, kind of deflection and blame and abuse. That's just how they do it. But I wanted, more for me. And I think as I, walked out of it, my kids started to see me doing better and becoming, walking in alignment and being in integrity and going through the pain and up leveling. And I think they, began to see, wow, this is, because you have to understand, when you've been on those drugs and off and in and out of hospitals, they're like, this lady's full of crap, and even when they didn't fault me, they were like, this lady's never going to get better. But I think over time, they really watched me do the work and began to really emerge in my, my real personality, my real essence of who I am without the trauma, without the drugs, started to appear. And I think it gave them a real solid hope that I actually, could get better. And I also think that as the mom, I had so much, regret that I had not been there, or been able to be there for them when they were younger, that I felt a real responsibility and an obligation to make sure that they had, the tools and the people to work with that could help them, navigate their way out as well. That was a very, very big deal to me, that I found people, whether it was somebody I was working with or somebody else for them to work with, to help them process everything.
Yeah. Can you, I was going to say quickly, because I work in the field as a body worker, as a trauma-informed practitioner, like, there's so many differences, like between conventional modalities. So I'm curious, like, what separates someone like a Dr. Kelly Brogan from a more conventional psychiatrist? What separates the trauma-informed practitioners that you work with? Like, I'm curious, like, what were some of the modalities? And, if you don't have to name names, what was it that worked for you? Because like people that are watching this, and I know I have friends of mine who are struggling to get off of medication. They've been on them for 15, 20 years, and they're in that process of weaning off, and they're scared. They don't know how, or they don't know where to receive support. So because I'm such a lover of healing in all forms, like I would love to know, what were some of the things that really, really worked for you and your family?
I think probably the biggest, if I could give anyone a huge piece of advice, extremely relevant, the most relevant piece of advice for healing yourself, I would tell them to do not negate the power of a toxic relationship on your mental health. I had no clue the power, and I want to say again, I was also toxic in that relationship as well. It takes two people inside of that. But I had worked for like 2 years and really, really healing myself. And our neural pathways become kind of, I call it rutted out, right? In this conditioning, in this way of engaging with certain people in our life based on our history, based on our experiences, those neural pathways again, just kind of get rutted out as the default, neural pathway. That's how we see, or that's how we engage inside this relationship. So a very profound story for me that I noticed right away. I had stopped talking to my ex-husband for like 2 years. I had stopped all contact. And they say if you're dating or with a narcissist, you need to block him, delete him. And I considered him just this evil narcissist. So I stopped talking to him completely. One day, my youngest son was going into a psych hospital because my kids were in so much trauma. And I picked up the phone and I called him. And I remember I thought at the time, wow, I've done so much work. I'll be able to talk to him and I'll be able to be this, healed person and very, very calm and really enlightened. And it was so interesting because I got on the phone with him, and within 30 seconds of me being on the phone, after not having spoken to him for 2 years, we were engaged in this pattern. And it's like this default mechanism just kicked in immediately without me even being aware of it. And here we were back in this pattern that we had been in for the past 30 years immediately without me even noticing it was happening until after the fact. And so my point on that is that the toxicity of relationships, and yes, you do carry those patterns over from your childhood. That is what is, I think, causing people so much grief and trauma, and is leading people into the world of psychiatric medicine, because they are not seeing, or they're not able to break down the patterns that are causing the flawed thinking, the flawed logic, the shame, the guilt. And those are all things that are passed down to us generationally. And that's what people have to start stepping into and identifying, and you would know this, a great way to start is, how do I feel around this person? What is my body telling me? I had a body worker tell me once, I said, I don't think that I can be around, this person. And she said, and I said, but I feel really guilty. I should be able to. And she was like, your body is sending you data. Your body is sending you data. You have to start learning to listen to the data that your body is sending you. And so I took a step back and I was like, I feel it. I cannot be around this person. I feel very constricted. I feel like I'm going to hyperventilate. Possibly I have been able to work to where I could do that at some point. That is my goal. And I'm at that goal now. But at the time I was like, I can't. She was like, forgive yourself. Listen to your body. And so that's what I would start telling people is start listening to your body, start listening to, because it knows on a very, very deep level what's going on. And what they're doing with these psych drugs is they are shutting down our intuition. They are disconnecting our brains and our souls from God and from our, that deep intuition that tells us, something is not right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that statement. I think the more we move towards this integration, but really understanding the role the body plays, because it's like so much is just like from the neck up.
Yeah.
And it's just like, but when we can tune into that deep intuition, to that gut response, to whatever that is for that person, where they're able to tune in, that's where some powerful changes can come from. And that's our nature, that's coming deep from within, from our subconscious, from our unconscious. And the more we're cut off from that, it's tough to be grounded in reality.
It is. It very much is.
And people don't realize that, but many of the sages and philosophers of the past have compelled and implored people to look at the wisdom of the body. Nietzsche himself said, no philosophy is as deep as the wisdom of the body, but this malignant culture that we live in just forces us, as Yerasimos says, to just live head up and not really pay attention. This goes back to even born sinner paradigms, religion, negate the body, look for everything external to you. So this conditioning is actually so deep and so embedded in us. One thing quickly on, you mentioned that often we're not willing to, or we don't realize that it's our childhood trauma that's actually playing out to be resolved. And there's this general stigma amongst most people that we have this fear of looking negatively upon our childhood, or even vilifying our parents in any kind of way. Do you think, well, I feel that way, but do you feel like that dogma is a block to us actually opening up that unconscious, which is our childhood wounding and our childhood trauma, because we're just so programmed to be like, I can never think badly about my parents, about my upbringing, about nothing?
I hear you. And that's so funny because I haven't even thought of that in like 3 years. That's so interesting. Kind kind of a blast from the past for me, but I do remember. But for me, I am somebody that's, I think my whole life questioned. I think I was probably a thorn in my parents' side growing up. Why do we do it this way? Why is it like this? Asking teachers, you shouldn't have said that. You did this. I'm very much in integration. I'm super. I have to have the truth in front of me. And that's why I think I got so messed up for so many years, because I think, deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I knew it wasn't right. But here I have professionals, and then the drugs themselves turn my brain inside out. I think that very much cripples people, though, because I have learned to communicate, with my parents I've moved from, it's definitely have been many iterations of myself, as I've been healing. At first, it was like, fuck you guys, this is what you did to me, when I was growing up. Yeah. And then I got my kids saying the same thing to me, right? So I'm pulling that in as well. And but I'm admitting it. You're right. I did. That's, it's terrible the childhood you guys had, but then it's really shifted into, it may sound very triggering to people, because at the time it sounded really triggering to me, but it's moved into, it just is. It just, was what it was. And a sense of compassion and grace that, based on where we all were, my parents, my ex, my kids, his parents, all of us, based on where we were, what we knew, and who we thought we were, it could not have happened any other way.
Yeah.
I would even go on to say that it was a blessing that it did happen, because here we have a breakdown of these faulty patterns and these illusions that we had all been living in. Definitely.
There's no coincidences. There's only synchronicities. And I mean, as Jung said, no tree can reach heaven that doesn't have its roots in hell, Yes. So it's almost like the events or the experiences that you had are obviously equivalent to what was necessary to actually bring forth, that heaven, and to awaken that and to start mobilizing. It's incredible. I think this is a great place to wrap up the first half of this episode. Everyone that's tuned in so far, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you guys. We're going to be continuing this incredible dialogue with an amazing woman, Ali Zeck, on the other side. Thanks for listening, and to our members, we'll see you in a little bit. All right, to our members, welcome back to the second half of this episode with Ali Zeck. We've been having an incredible deep dialogue so far on her journey and what it really means to heal, and just the effects of pharmaceutical psychiatric drugs and the harm that is inhibited through what is being peddled under the guise of healthcare. It's absolutely shocking. One thing on my mind is, like, looking at it now, like, what is the MO behind the manufacturers? Like, we can always just say it's just profit. It's just to build reliance. But I mean, these drugs are obviously created in some kind of way to put someone in a certain state, like, how do you perceive that? Like, someone is making these chemicals for someone to be in this and to have this terrible experience,
I think for me, I go back, I do, you could keep it as a very, very narrow approach. Like, yeah, it's for greed and profit. But when you really start to unwrap the whole box, it gets much, much bigger. And I always, go back to the early 1900s when Rockefeller had, Standard Oil Company, and he, invented petrochemicals. And that's where, Big Pharma really started from. And it was, I think, with forethought and malice, that they started, most of the medical, institutions and universities, and put doctors in these white coats. And they really did create a religion, even though most people in it would never, oh, it's not a religion. No, it's actually a religion, because you are placing your life source in that, in that care of that external system, thinking it's going to save you. And so that's what I look at. But it also goes down to, from a metaphysical, a spiritual standpoint, these drugs significantly alter our consciousness. Yeah. I have been there, and I would liken, me being on those drugs to really being, under some type of demonic possession. It was that intense. It was like an alter reality, where even like the way, like I said earlier, I perceived depth, I perceived light the way I viewed the world was completely altered in a really, really, what it's doing is it's creating, in layman's terms, it's creating synthetic neural pathways that shouldn't be there, that wouldn't be there were you not taking a chemically, altering neurotoxic drug.
Yeah, it's kind of like ritualistic in a sense, they're trying to put someone through some kind of intentional, like trauma altered reality ritual of whatever their sick creation is.
Yeah, and what you said before too, it's like a lot of this is about disconnecting us from our soul. So it's like if people are connected to the divine within, if they're connected to God, they're going to see through the illusions that are fed to us on a daily basis in every element of society. But if you're not, then if you aren't connected to that part of you, to the deeper wisdom within you, then you almost need that malignancy to survive. You need to stay with it, to stay connected to it, just to be connected to something, because you've lost connection to the depths within you.
It's I call them tentacles of the matrix. The matrix sounds very cliche, but that really what it is. And I consider the matrix to be this vehicle that darkness uses through the process of conditioning, programming, and conditioning us to have certain beliefs about ourselves and the way the world works. And one of the biggest red pills for me to swallow, it's so large, it's taken me a couple of years to really grasp it all, is the the concept of alcohol. Alcohol is a poison, and if you step back and you observe our society, it's celebrated, it's pushed on us. It's a rite of passage that we celebrate for a child turning 21 to get on a party bus with their parents and just get wasted, or put a hose down your mouth and pour poison. And it's just like, in a way, kind of fascinating for me, because I've never liked alcohol. I just don't feel good on it at all, but it's just fascinating because it's such a conditioned response inside of our society to, again, not only accept it, but to celebrate it and push it on people. And it's absolute poison. It's literally toxic to your system, but yet plant medicine, right, is illegal. And that's where, plant medicine could open up our eyes and our minds to a deeper connection with ourselves and with our creator, but that's illegal. So it's all very, very planned out, in my opinion, that they push. During last year, they left liquor stores open, but they closed churches. It's just, it's like comical to me at this point, how paradoxical it all is.
Yeah. In Melbourne, Australia, they left open pubs and brothels, everything else.
Yeah. And you see how deep this goes, because if you get into Hollywood and you get into the media and you get into the mind control programming, and if you think that a culture, society is going to end up being and behaving like what's plastered across these screens, you see what's celebrated on the media. Like everything is all about having a drink and having a good time and partying and not living your best self and not living your best life. And it's like, if these things are what's being represented on the screen and people are being tuned in that kind of like tranced out state, mind control state, like of course our society is going to be what it is. It's like what you said earlier, it just is. And so if this is what people are relying on, if this is what has power over people's consciousness, then the world we see around us, it's no surprise to me. But the question is, how do you unplug? What's necessary? What kind of work needs to be done? And that's where personal responsibility, self-responsibility comes in, and you have to take the reins of your own life, and you get support along the way and do what you have to do to heal your trauma, to see the way you're being manipulated. Because if you can't see it, then you're going to fall victim to it to some degree. Absolutely.
No, I completely agree. Hollywood has been a big red pill again for me to swallow too, because it's like, kind of walk into these more and more, and I'm like, it's just one big, it is not about entertainment. It is absolutely not. I consider it an arm of the military in many ways, because it's so programmed to culturally, condition us, and put predictive, programming shows up there to, kind of ooze into our consciousness, so that when that does come out later, we're not so shocked by it. We're actually kind of attracted to it, and we feel familiar. Because I always say this, we're not attracted to what's healthy. We're attracted to what feels familiar to us.
Mhm.
You know, coming out of our childhood, we're not attracted to healthy. If we've grown up in a dysfunctional household, we will be attracted to something that feels familiar, even if it's unhealthy or unsafe, versus being attracted to what's healthy, because that's what we know. That's what gives us comfort in a really, really weird way. So Hollywood is just, I'm done. I had to kind of kill off mentally everybody in my mind that I had ever thought. And, you know, I was thinking the other day, even like when you look at Keanu Reeves, everybody's like, oh, he's such a good guy, you know, but if you look at the Matrix in the movie and the guys behind the Wachowski brothers, whoever that made it, they're part of the system. And I even realized a couple of months ago, I'm like, yeah, but in reality, he's playing the role of the good guy in real life. You know, he's playing the role of the nice guy, the good guy, the awakened guy in real life. They're all playing a role. Anybody at any significant level in Hollywood has either become a victim of mind control, or they have legitimately signed a contract to be part of that network.
Yeah, and it goes really deep. I mean, even just like recently, I decided to watch a show again that I hadn't seen in like 11 years. It was one of my favorite shows when I was younger, and I decided to watch it with my wife because she hadn't watched it. And you know, I was hip to some of this stuff 10, 11 years ago, but not to the degree that I am. And to watch the episode where they're like, okay, well, you know, we need to take you to the doctor. You know, like this is what we need you to do. And then the doctor goes, well, you're gonna have to take these pills for the rest of your life. You know, and like, I'm gonna have these issues for the rest of my life. So these like subtle little things that go in there, even in like these shows that I think, you know, have an impact emotionally. You see how people are living, like there could be some benefits, but they subtly put these things in there, or not so subtly, but and that for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you know, have an impact on the consciousness of humanity. And so that's why they don't think twice, like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna do this, like, because this is what I know. It's just, you know, again, it makes sense.
Let me ask you this, because sorry. Okay.
The seemingly innocuous things done over and over and over again add up to something very, very significant.
Repetition. The repetition is part of mind control.
Yeah.
It's the primary basis of mind control is repetition. But let me ask you this on Hollywood and celebrity culture, because it's quite topical at the moment. Nicki Minaj now with the vaccine hesitancy. What do you think, that's a ploy, a part of it, or is there something real for you? How do you feel about that?
I've been, you know, through so many rabbit holes that at this point I don't trust any.
Yeah.
And right away, I'm always looking for the contrary. And again, to me, she's playing a role. I mean, she's playing the role. And so unfortunately, you know, her and Chris Rock, who just, you know, tweeted that he had COVID and for everybody to get vaccinated. You know, and I tweeted back at him, just let us know how much you were paid to tweet that, and we'll go home. Unfortunately, people of color are one of the lowest, you know, have the lowest vaccination rates, which is awesome. But those two, you know, very, very instrumental Black people in their community are now going to be telling them to go get the vaccine, because, you know, she got invited to the White House, and now she's going to go, in my opinion, she's going to go get all the science, you know, from Fauci, and then she's going to come back and eat crow. And, oh, you know, he made me see the light. Everybody needs to go get vaccinated. It's all bullshit. I mean, it's just, you guys know it. I mean, again, like I said at the beginning, once you put those new glasses on, or they're put onto you, you can't take them off and put the other ones on. You see it through a whole new lens. And it is literally, and I don't mean this to speak ill of these people, but they're just clowns. I mean, they really, really are just clownish people kind of posing. I call them like karaoke characters, you know, people that like walk into bars and they can sing karaoke, and they might have like an entourage behind them, and they just look ridiculous, but they get up on stage and they think they're so cool. And I'm like, this is what Hollywood is to me, like to me now. I'm like, you guys look absolutely ridiculous up there. And people are just gobbling it up because people are so desperate to connect with something outside of themselves, because they have been taught, we've been conditioned to not look inside.
Yeah. And I think that is the basis of how they're able to pull so much of this off, is that they've fabricated a overlay of a culture which makes it easy for us to externalize because we're so willing to avoid pain, because everything that's fed to us is avoid pain this way, bypass this way, escape this way. And then all these little gateways are given to us to get away from it. Whereas in the past, we had these organic rites of passages where we were meant to feel pain, we were meant to feel suffering, we were meant to use that as the kindling to evolve and grow. Whereas now it's like, no, he's an antidepressant. You know what I mean? Depressed, that's a psychological problem. It's like we don't feel freaking anything. And it's just, how can I keep getting away? And I mean, you look at like Brave New World and stuff like this, and you can kind of see where the timeline is going, you know what I mean? In a sense. But to me now, it's like, I don't know how much of that is like kind of predictive programming for us to create their Brave New World in a way. That was just something on my mind.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to watch. And it's, so I keep saying it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah.
Because you're as an observer, right? We're observing all this. We're, for the most part, not getting pulled into that narrative anymore. And we're trying to point it out. No one's listening. We're becoming the abuser for trying to point out the abuse. And so all you can really do is step back and, continue to do the work on ourselves. And I think it really calls for people to, like us, that are, awake, to understand that we lead people out by leading ourselves out.
Yeah.
We, continue to do the work. We continue to set an example. I know that I've been around people that have witnessed me, the shift in my consciousness and in my way of being, where they were like kind of intrigued, actually, like, wow, like she's not full of shit this time.
Yeah.
Something does seem different about her. And, even over the last year and a half, I'm sure you guys have evolved. I've evolved from, calling people sheeps, telling people they're full of shit, telling people to, wake the fuck up, what's wrong with you,
Yeah.
to, having compassion for those people. Yeah. And really just bringing it back, instead of projecting or blaming them, bringing it back into myself and, collaborating with people like you guys in order to get the messaging out there of what life can be like once you start to unclip from the matrix and the oppressive state it has you in.
Do you think most people are in a trauma bond with the government?
I think most people are, it's a really good question. I think most people are in a trauma state of survival. And I think that the way our society is set up, even from the very beginning where we have birth, right? In a white, sterile hospital, ripped, with medications, already coming through us, circumcision, umbilical cords being cut like that. I think that we grow up with significant trauma. And then we also have our family's generational trauma being passed on to us. And so I think it, just like, my childhood made me ripe for that relationship, that toxic relationship, the way that our lives are structured, unless you were one of the very, very few that had parents that kind of got it, that were living in a commune, off grid for the last 30 years. And they taught you about all of this, which is not very many people. You have trauma. And so that, yes, you are bonded because, again, that nuance and that abusive relationship that you are accustomed to out in the world, it feels very familiar. It feels, not healthy, but it feels familiar to you. So that's what you bond to. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone cares for me. Someone's looking out for me. I'm supported.
They would never do that. Yeah. I mean, they would, the government would never, pharmaceutical companies, they would never do that. It's really hard. But again, I was in the same spot, and that's what I write my posts. I'm really trying to talk to that old version of myself to say, hey, this is what's really going on. Can you expand your mind to possibly see it a different way?
Yeah, I think it's something that we talk about so often on this show with our guests, and even Joel and myself, is like how important it is to take personal responsibility, to understand like what we have control over. Like what you said before, like we could sit there and bang on everyone and tell them to wake the fuck up. But at the end of the day, it's like, let me control what I can control.
Yeah.
What can I do? How can I become a better husband? How can I be a better son? How can I be healthier? How am I nourishing my mind, my body, and my spirit? You know, am I online all the time and taking things in? Because, you know, I grapple with that. It's like I have that investigative part of me that like really wants to know and have the information, but I'm being impacted on a subconscious level. You know, these big tech algorithms are impacting us. Even if we're awake to the degree we are, these powers that be, they understand the human mind better than we know ourselves, and so they can just hack you. The subconscious programming goes so deep. So it's like, can we disconnect truly? Can we go look at a tree for 35 minutes, you know, and then as we're looking at the tree, pay attention to how we're breathing, you know, pay attention to what thoughts are coming in, to really bring that attention back to the soma, back to the body, you know, because it's like our minds can go pretty wild. And yeah, I just think it's important. I think it's important to disconnect as much as we can from the matrix, even for those of us who think like, oh, we're so awake. I know.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, well, they're still trying to play us on some level, you know?
I totally agree. I actually posted something like that before my last account got deleted on Instagram, that even truthers, right, can become addicted to, you know, Instagram and to getting the truth out there and to having to have people wake up and really force their impressions on everybody. And you're right. I mean, there's science. We know we've had people that have left, you know, Instagram and Facebook come out and testify that they know exactly, like, you know, what your eye movement means, and they're tracking everything. And so that's why I'm like, you know, the best thing we can do is stay off of these. Somebody called it, you ghost, and you post and you ghost. Like, you know, I'll go make a post and then I'll get off of there, try to engage as much as I can, but then get off and go live the rest of my life. Because that's what they don't want us to do. They want us, even those, you know, those of us on the right side, right, on the side of truth, they want us consumed by the technology. And, you know, I made a post today that, you know, I had one of my accounts had 150,000 followers on it, and they just deleted it one day. And, you know, had I not done the work over the last couple of years, that would have thrown me for the loop, because, you know, my identity would have been in having this huge following on Instagram. And luckily I had done the work. So I was like, this is a freaking joke. I mean, you guys, it doesn't affect me. And that's one thing I want to point out too, is that one thing in my healing, I've really learned. I said at the beginning that my concept of narcissism has really shifted. And what it's really evolved into is taking personal responsibility for myself. Because what I think, if you really step back and look, is what everybody that's going along with this narrative is, they've been able to keep them in very much a victim consciousness. So everybody's blaming, deflecting. No one's willing, you know, none of these people are willing to take personal responsibility for their lives. They think a shot, an injection is going to give them health, rather than changing their lives. You know, changing the way they eat, changing the way they, you know, view their bodies, and how to, you know, live in an integrated way. They want it easy, and they want to blame, shame, and, you know, reject real health for becoming a dependent victim of, you know, pharma. It's tragic to watch.
Yeah.
That's how I was when I got out of that relationship. And yes, terrible things did happen to me. But I would say that's a really pivotal point in my healing, when I was able to say, you know what happened to me happened to me. And I would have to go through it. You know, they say healing happens on a spiral, and I would just go round and round with it and revisit these, you know, concepts and these wounds until, you know, they would just begin to not affect me anymore. I wouldn't have that electrical charge with them anymore. And I shifted from like, oh, you did this to me, into, yes, that happened. You know, it happened. And I would be able to say that without a charge now. And now it's even leading me into, you know, from, oh, you did this to me, to, yes, that happened, to, you know what, it was all for good. It was all for good. And that's a huge leap to make. And it does take a lot of time to get there, but it's by far the most freeing, you know, place I've been in my entire life, to take personal accountability for where I was and what happened to me, and to understand that in the very end, it was all for a really magnificent part of me to open up and expand.
Yeah. Truly. And again, it's not like we're saying there aren't victims. There are victims. People are victimized. People spend time in victim consciousness. But do you live there?
Exactly.
Are
And
you
yeah, and
staying,
I have,
you
that's a
know?
very good point. I mean, I do have to go back and recount, this did happen to me. I'm not going to negate it. I'm going to validate that that did happen to me, but I just don't give it the power over me that it used to have.
Yeah. And what you said at the end is really cool, because earlier I actually wanted to say, like, do you have regrets? Because that's an interesting term that people talk about. And it's like, well, if you've gone through this hero's journey and you've taken the lessons that the creator, like giving you this life to go on this journey and take these challenges and then become who you are sitting here right now, having this conversation with us. It's just an interesting subject to talk about. So I'm curious, like based on even what you just said of how you've come to this realization from like blaming others to saying this is something that happened and then realizing this was all to continue the evolution of my soul, to have me be who I am, to break the cycles from my conditioning and to then pass things on for wherever I go in the next life through eternity. So what's your view on regrets? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Zero. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just, I told somebody a while ago, those big the easy buttons they used to have for like Office Max or whatever. I'm like, if that button were in front of me and I was like, you know what, I have to press it again, I'd press it again in a heartbeat. I would choose to do it this way only because of what I know and who I am and how I'm able to be present in the world and be an observer and not get pulled into all that pain and just the absolute chaos that I see other people still stuck in. No question, I would do it again in a heartbeat, the same way. Way. I'd actually be worried a little bit that it wouldn't turn out the same way because it's amazing now, but I would trust that it would all work out, the way it's supposed to. Yeah.
If you have self-love, you can't have regret, because if you like who you are, then how can you regret any one of the singular events that culminated into you being who you are? I
totally agree. I also have come to understand too that even those people that abuse me, I have a deep love and respect for them, because I have learned, when you're a victim, and I was very victimized, I don't want to ever negate that, but it was such a painful place to be where you're continually blaming people for your own pain. And to be able to shift and transmute out of that into one of personal responsibility and empowerment, and then be able to look back and actually realize that those people, and granted, maybe it wasn't, they're doing consciously, but they really, really gave you, I think it's, I forget who it is, but said somebody gave me a box of darkness, and it was the best gift I ever, had. And that really is, it just depends on, what you want to do with it. I mean, our biggest breakdowns can actually become our biggest breakthroughs if we are willing to, pony up to the bar and go in there and take it.
Yeah.
And receive it.
Well, it's almost like all these events are constantly prodding us to take responsibility, but the more that we evade that responsibility, the more the cycle perpetuates until we're like, all right, giddy up. I'm going to take the reins now and start even on the smallest level. One thing that I can do to start clawing my power back, instead of constantly giving it away. And that seems overwhelming to a lot of people because they think they want their problems to be solved overnight, or there's one big thing that's going to fix everything. But no, it's a matter of you listening intuitively to just the most surface little thing that you need to deal with to then get to the deeper layers of what your problems actually are. And I mean, we have to have the journey. We have to have the rite of passage, even on a healing path. You can't have instant healing because it's never going to last for you unless you had the experience yourself. You flex the muscle of discernment through that process to actually stand on the other side and be like, I went through something. I had the experience, and I now have the embodied knowledge of where I was and where I am and what happened in the middle.
Completely. You have to be able to have that, like, that perspective of like, this is where I was, and this is where I am now, and see that journey as it's unfolded for you. And it's not going to happen when you're driving through a football stadium and getting an injection, in your arm. That's not how the world works at all.
Like I say this sometimes, it's just sometimes nice to take a breath and enjoy the silence.
Absolutely, man. It's shocking and it's saddening to think, that so many people believe that this needle is the be all and end all of this fabricated freaking situation that we're living in the first place. Like, just looking at it, it just blows my mind to how people can buy into what's taken place and then even buy into the resolution being this injection, I mean,
on some level, it's like, again, it makes sense based on how culture has impacted humanity. I mean, even just from like the internet, like people read books anymore? It's like they just click on the clickbait art. They just look at headlines. Oh, I looked at a headline. I know what's happening in the world, and now I'm gonna like tell everyone about that based on a headline because I just want something really quick. I don't need to put the work in and actually to take the time and to turn the pages and to have something inspire introspection, because it's like there's always the next thing to do, So like, of course, when the government goes, oh, do you want to get on with your life and get on and do the next thing? Like, just take this quick thing and the next thing will go back to normal. So people, because they've been primed for so long to just go to the next thing. Oh, this relationship takes work. Oh, I don't need that. I could just swipe right and find a new relationship. I could just swipe right, find a new relationship. I don't need to look in the mirror. I don't need to feel the pain. Again, this is why we talk about, and it's part of my work, is to be as healthy as you can, to allow this stuff to bubble up from the unconscious so you can face it and deal with it and integrate it and see how that then shifts you and changes you. So, it really is about disconnecting from the culture, disconnecting from the matrix in order to even come to these realizations. Because if you're hooked into it and you're in it, it's just normal. Like, we're the crazy ones.
You don't know any, you don't know. That's all you know. It's so true. You don't know any different. That's so true. And like a year ago, I kind of was on this, like, I'm so enlightened kick. And I was like, I'm out of the matrix. I'm done. And it's like, the matrix it's a constant daily practice to, I'll find something new attached to me, or I'll see something and I'm like, oh shit, I didn't realize I was, going down that way. It's a constant process for me, at least, of having to see, observe, and acknowledge the tentacles, that some type of conditioning or old wounding has on me, and then do the work to remove them. It's a lot.
Now that you've had the journey and you've witnessed, well, what you had to do to get to the other side, for those listening, what are the signposts of healing? What are the signposts of authenticity coming into our lives? What do you notice along the way that you recognize as, okay, I am on the right track now,
Ooh, that's a really tough one, Joel. For me, now, as I sit now, and I'm, 5 years, I'd say my awakening started happening in 2014. So I've been doing this probably 7 years. Not that other people don't do it faster, or can. I would say for me now, it's just I call it resistance. And it's so funny because all these terms, 4 years ago, I'd be like, I don't want to talk about resistance because I was resisting it. Really learning to feel into resistance. And when I feel in my body, right? When I feel this resistance, then have learned to become really curious. Oh, what is that about? And, start to try to uncover it. So it's a process of, I call it, I am able at a point now where I'm able to observe what's going on, but not be absorbed by it, if that makes sense. I'm able to, I think Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, the space. And that's where I think I'm at least at, is where, for the most part, I still am human, but I'm able to choose to respond to something instead of reacting to it. And that's a really, really powerful place to be, but it's also extremely peaceful. I can't, it's a great time in my life. And as much as the world is burning around me, I feel very, very content and very, very peaceful because of that. So, that took a long time, though, to answer your question, Joel. It took me a long time to get there. It was just knee deep in shit. Face down in shit for a number of years, breaking down all these these paradigms and belief systems and conditioning that I had been through. I would tell someone though, if they are, in an abusive relationship, one of the best things for me was to start to take accountability for the role that you played in that relationship. If you look at how vilified narcissists are, which in my opinion, again, is just unintegrated and unresolved trauma. It's a trauma response from childhood. Typically, we are vilifying these people and making them so responsible for so much. And all that's doing is taking away our power to heal ourselves. And we're continually blaming them. One of my most powerful coaches that I worked with, I started working with him it was only about 8 months ago. We got on the phone and I work with many coaches, mentors, and I started telling him, this is what he did to me, and this is what he did to me, and this is what he did to me. Just this litany, list that I always had running in my head that I had typed up, laminated. Yep. And he was like, he did nothing to you. And I was like, bullshit, he did. Did you hear me? Did you not hear what I said? And I went through it again. He was like, he did nothing to you. And so it was a really powerful lesson for me though, because when Instagram went through, 4 weeks ago, I put a lot of work into my account. My one account was a whole just trajectory of my healing over 6 years. It was very, very important to me, very personal. And then they took out 3 other of my accounts the same day. But I was able to sit there and just be like, they did nothing to me, because I would not give that power over them to be a victim. And I really did feel that. I was able to be like, you know what? They didn't do anything to me. You did nothing to me, because I want to allow you to have that power over me. So that's what I would tell people that are in, whether it's with an intimate partner or a parent, if it's an abusive situation, yes, we make choices, and we usually make those choices when we're in the state to survive. And that is what the rest of the world, is in right now. They have them in a survival state. Once you can begin to take responsibility for yourself, for the role you've played, for the role moving forward, for your choices and actions, and say, you know what, this all ends with me. I am responsible. Eventually, it doesn't happen overnight, but you start to move into a place of creation. And creation to me is the opposite of survival. And that's where things begin to flow. They call it the flow state, at least for me. Things are very open, fluid. You don't feel as constricted and oppressed. And it's a really, really powerful place to be. So that's what, to answer your question, I would say start looking at the responsibility that you're playing in these roles in your life that are causing you pain.
You did say one of my favorite quotes that I just have to read. It's Viktor Frankl's quote that I talk about all the time, and I just think it's so powerful. And it is, between stimulus and response, there is a space, like you said. In that space is our power to choose our response, and our response lies our growth and our freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's so beautiful, and that exemplifies the work that needs to be done on an individual level. Is like, what can you do to build more resilience? What can you do to support the regulation of your nervous system? What can you do to let go of those gutted neural pathways and build new neural pathways? So when something does happen, there is that space to go, wow, normal, or maybe not even you would in the moment, you'd be like, oh, I used to do this, but you would just do something different. And then upon reflection, you go, for 20 years, someone said this or did this, and I responded in this way, and now I didn't. And for me, those are the signposts for me, is when I can compare back to previous behavior, previous actions I've taken based on some stimulus, and then realize that I've made a different choice. I go, and then the result is something better in my life, like something that brings me joy and fulfillment and satisfaction. I go, okay, cool. Let's keep going down that pathway and see what that brings. So I just love that you brought up that quote. I love that quote. And
Yeah, for me, that quote speaks to, just as I reflect on my own journey, becoming more grounded, becoming more embodied, externalizing less. Because when we're centered, when we're embodied, when we're grounded, we do have more choice, right? And that's what the freedom that Frankl refers to is pointing at. Because when we're in that reactive state, it's purely because we're not even here, right? We're just responding from everything that we've been conditioned to.
Yeah. And then of course, then the news can plaster something across the screen, and we're just in that state. We're reacting. Oh my God, did you hear this? Oh my God, there's a new variant. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God, Nicki Minaj is saving us. Oh my God. You know what I mean? It's just like, and it's on both sides, you know?
It's
like,
insane.
we fall victim to the hopium, you know, on both sides. Well,
Totally.
if everyone just does this thing,
Yeah.
you know?
If you would just listen, if you would just wake up, and if you have kind of like a panic. I will say though, my comedic relief, I don't watch TV at all, but once a week I will turn on my iPad, NBC Nightly News, and the theme song literally sounds like Star Wars. It's all like, just go listen to it one time. The headlines are just literally doom and gloom. And I'm like, this is freaking comedy hour to me now to watch this stuff. It's like watching a fake show. It's just beyond my scope of comprehension how stupid it is. It's a clown show. It really, really is.
They created reality TV, so we won't realize that they've been creating reality TV the whole fucking time. You know
what I mean? Again, once you see it from that angle, you guys, I know you can't unsee it. You can't see it the other way anymore.
It's literally the Truman Show. It's literally the Truman Show, and to these really people, we are just the characters that they think are buying into this illusion. You know. It's like, where are the stage walls, man? Where the fuck are the stage walls?
Exactly. Yep. Where's that door? I need to know.
Yeah. Oh God, I love that movie.
Jim Carrey, but he's one of the good guys, bro.
What'd you say?
He's one of the good guys.
Jim Carrey's one of the good guys.
You know what I will say, it's very interesting. I was actually talking to somebody about it today, and I never got to ask the question to her directly, but what do you guys think about the shows that do give us the answers, like The Matrix, because a lot of it's predictive programming, like the like I Am Legend with the bad guys, or The Walking Dead, or the
Deeper Vendetta
Masks. But then there's also those movies that show us our true power and kind of show us how to break out of the matrix. I mean, what do you guys think? Is that like Revelation of the Method, where they have to reveal? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a combination of things. I think part of it is, if you believe in that law that they need to tell you what's happening, that's part of it. It's the revelation of the method. I think also that it's not like every single person in an industry is the bad person. Like I don't think like
they're not all in on it.
Government is horrible and it just wants Marxism and socialism to take over and us to move into this totalitarian state. I just don't believe that. And I think the same thing for Hollywood. But also, I brought this up in another podcast, is that I also think some of these movies that are showing us how to be and how to live, I think also serve the purpose of allowing people to live vicariously through the characters, so they don't have to live that way in their life. So let's say everyone's, been saying, watch Braveheart, watch Lord of the Rings, which, I love those movies. But for most people, especially if you're plugged into the Matrix, you're living their normal life, but then you watch that movie and you get sucked in, and then you get to be Braveheart, and then you get to be Aragorn, and you feel it, and you're just like, oh, I'm living this life, and I'm having this experience. And then you go back to your life and you don't really do anything, you don't make any changes because you got the fix.
Wow, I never thought of it. That's very
the drug. And so I think that has an impact on a lot of people, not everyone. Like I feel like maybe even for me to some degree it's affected me, but I think because I know how Hollywood is used to the degree that I know, I'm not saying I know everything, is that I can watch that movie and be really inspired. Like separate a little bit from it. So that's what I think. Joel, if you have anything to add.
No, I agree. You get to have the pseudo rite of passage, so you don't actually enact that in your actual reality, and you're just maintained within the cubicles and in your routine, and you never think that I need to become the hero of my own life, because that hero is kind of filled in for us through Hollywood.
That's so interesting, you guys, because I would also parallel that with professional sports, because have emasculated men to the degree that they sit there with, carrying 50 pounds of beer gut, on their bodies, living vicariously through these professional athletes who are making millions. And these men are so rejected and dejected and just, down and out with themselves that they live vicariously through those athletes. It's tragic.
Yeah, and some of these bread and
creating their own life.
Yeah, and some of the bread and circuses, it serves the purpose that, let's say there's this like nozzle of like, where your the deepest parts of you, your authentic self is trying to get you to like feel the pain of your existence, but then you get to like watch the TV show or watch the movie, or watch Braveheart, or watch the football game, and it lets out just enough little air so okay, I could go back to my life. Where if that didn't exist, I think people would have to face the truth of their reality much faster, much quicker, and shit would get real.
Wow, that's really profound. I never thought about it. That helps me a lot because I've been wondering. That makes sense. It makes total sense.
The only one other vantage point that I'd add to it, like with movies like The Matrix, The Truman Show, etc., is that if there is an organic awakening happening, now they have the opportunity to direct the narrative. Like this is what the awakening is. This is what's actually going on. You mean they still get the chance to control the storyline because they've kind of fed it to you in a way.
Kind of like revelations in the Bible.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting to think about and pontificate and just see like what are these things, and they can be used for multiple purposes. It's like Shakespeare. It's like one line can have multiple meanings. So a sports game, a movie can have multiple impacts and effects based on the person who's looking at it and watching it and taking it in. Like everything we're talking about right now. Like I wouldn't say for everyone, watching Braveheart goes, okay, well, I don't need to do anything now. I don't need to fight for freedom and scream freedom to So I don't know.
All I know is I called Kelly Brogan like 3 years ago and I was knee deep in it and I was really like angry, frustrated. I was like, how many birth canals does this person have to go through? Because I would get through with one and then there would be another one. And I'm like, the rabbit hole, that's the one thing I've learned. Rabbit holes never end. These rabbit holes, these red pills, they will never end. It's just the tentacles that keep, appearing and you have to keep doing the work to detach from them. But every day it's like, wow, it's just fascinating to watch
and
the number of them.
Yeah, and also the need to know can be its own form of slavery.
Oh, completely.
It's like, because we're never going to know everything.
Completely.
Like
you said earlier, I used to want to research everything. And now I'm like, some of this shit I just don't care about. Okay, that is how it is. Great. I'm going to go play with my dogs. I'm going to go outside and take a break because I don't really care. That doesn't interest me. I don't need to know, the angle. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of what they're trying to do. And I don't feel the need to know the nitty gritty anymore. I don't need Bill Gates's address. I don't need to know, his financial taxes and all that information anymore. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me.
And to me, this is where individuality is so important as well, because we've got the world out there and we know what the world is doing, but what are we doing for our own world? You know what I mean? For me, I take the viewpoint that we're all individual universes unto ourselves. You know what I mean? So I'm here to feed myself. I don't need to keep feeding that narrative. I want to explore myself and bring my insides out. You know what I mean? And so delve into the wonder of me. Why do I need to know everything about what's going on out there when I've got millions of riches inside me, which I'm never going to discover all of them? And I think if each one of us did that and really discovered who we are, why we're here, who we're born to become, and focused our attention and our energy in exploring that, then all of a sudden the entire veil will fall away because it doesn't even matter anymore.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, my last question I have for you is, well, what's next for you? Like, what's your continuing mission? Like, the big tech people, they've taken your account down. Like,
you guys,
I'm back on. I started another account last night. So
okay. I think I just followed it. So
you guys are the most censored family of all time. You have to be.
Do what? I'm sorry.
I said, you guys are the most censored family of all time. Like it just has to be.
Oh yeah. Legit. It's just funny. Alex back on too, but we just kind of laugh. It's kind of a joke to me now. I will say that they did a superb job with Instagram. It is a very addictive platform because it's just so user friendly, but it's also very interactive. You know what I mean? With the stories and the way that the feeds show up, it's amazing. So I kind of did it as a joke just to get back on there, but I also miss the community on there, and I'm going to, put it up there for as long as it lasts until they, take me down again if they do. But I am building my own website called We the Freed, FREED, and that will have a platform and a subscription service if people want to, come on there. And what will be on there will be me and my kids, and we'll be talking about our own individual healing. So mine would be like the psychiatric drugs, the abusive relationship, and then theirs would be, their own healing, stories of healing. But then we would also be talking about collectively how we've healed as a family. I also want to highlight other people in the world that have stories of healing that we can put on the site. And I called it We the Freed, meaning I have declared myself free from these, whatever type of oppressive system, whether it be, governments, relationships, belief systems, drugs, addictions, unconscious coping mechanisms. It's something that I'm really going to be, super inspired by. And I also, at my house, am starting a regenerative farm here. Nice. And I have no idea what I'm doing, like literally no idea. So that I'll also highlight that on there too, because I figure that that's one area we all need to be moving towards, is self-sustainability. And I thought I could share my process of that here at my house and show people how we're doing that.
Amazing. So nice to have a container to pour your creativity into, and the whole website sounds like something beautiful, which will evolve into something great for all of you. It was such a pleasure to have you on here, to chat with you and to connect with you. Honestly, so grateful to have this conversation.
Yeah, I feel the same.
I appreciate you guys. I really appreciate you guys, because the world changes when we have more men, especially, really stepping into their role as a sovereign being and modeling that behavior. As we've said, they're really doing everything they can to emasculate men and take away, your power on an individual basis, and make you think, wearing a dress and things like that are what, the world needs from you. And we really need for more men like you to stand up and be willing to speak truth, even if it's very, very painful. So I just, owe a huge debt of gratitude to you guys as well.
Thank you, Ali. Yeah, really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you for listening to Here for the Truth. To our members, we really appreciate you guys. Ali, thank you so much. I know everyone listening is going to draw so much goodness from everything shared here today. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.
Smoking mirrors, I'm seeing through the illusion. Waking up in a time they think you're in a delusion. Somebody set the alarms, cause they be too busy snoozing. I'm in a DeLorean.